Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our fourth session of today. This session, my name, by the way, is Brent Kynoch. I'm the Managing Director of the Environmental Information Association, and I serve the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization as Chair of the Prevention Advisory Board. This session is entitled Advocacy Global Ban Asbestos Action. And in this session, we have several speakers, either from or representing various countries around the world, who will tell us about the efforts in their countries to ban asbestos and to deal with the tragedies caused by asbestos that currently exist in buildings and homes in their country. Our first speaker was scheduled to be Risha Patel, and Risha sends her regrets. She is a victim of storm damage from storms that have recently ravaged the Southeast United States, but I did want to introduce her in her absence because she has been a great intern with ADAO. Risha is a graduate of East Carolina University, where she acquired her Bachelor of Science degree in Public Health and a minor in Business Management. Right after graduation, she moved to LA and joined ADAO as an intern. And since that time, she has attended 3 ADAO International Asbestos Awareness Conferences and 2 ADAO Congressional Staff Briefings, which has actually intensified her passion for public and global health around the world. With that in mind, she recently completed her Master of Public Health degree, an MPH at Georgia State University in Atlanta, Georgia. And she's excited to begin her career there. And that's where she is now trying to deal with the ravages of the storms that kind of pounded Atlanta in the last couple of weeks. Risha and her family are from India, and for that reason, she closely follows what's happening in India in relation to asbestos. And as I said earlier, she does send her regrets. So on to our next scheduled speaker, who probably does not need much of an introduction, but she's going to get a great one anyway, and that's Fernanda Giannasi. We are just delighted to have Fernanda with us. I want to tell you a bit about her. Fernanda is the founder of the Brazilian Association of People Exposed to Asbestos, also known as ABREA, A-B-R-E-A. She is a civil and safety engineer and an ex-labor inspector for the Ministry of Labor and Employment for 30 years. Currently, she's retired and acting as an expert advisor for the Labor Prosecutors, Federal Labor Public Ministry, as well as asbestos victims solicitors. Fernanda has led thousands of workers who have filed lawsuits against the asbestos industry. In charge of a federal labor inspector, she staunchly defended the public interest on worker safety and health and was pressured by the asbestos lobby of both Brazil and Canada, enduring all kinds of pressures, harassments, and even including death threats and offensive campaigns and criminal charges by her detractors. Despite these, she has continued her advocacy. Fernanda is often known as the Brockovich of Brazil, and I'm sure from your presentation you will find out just exactly why she is known as that. Fernanda, we're delighted to have you with us.
Hi, thank you. Good afternoon. Initially, I greet all the participants in one more edition of ADAO's conference. And I thank you, especially my friend Linda Heinstein, for this honorable invitation. Thank you so much. I'm really honored to be with so many people around the world. I'm speaking from Brazil, representing the Brazilian Asbestos Victims, ABREA, to present our work in order to implement this next one, slide. The Supreme Court's ruling that banned asbestos in whole country since November 30th, 2017. This decision has been blackmailed by the asbestos mining company SAMA, owned by Eternity Corporation, which dismissed 300 workers and filed dozens of appeals. It is a true legal battle. Injunctions were since there. sorry, injunction. It's missing one N in the word, sorry. Next one. This is the timeline since the banishment of the asbestos was declared. Next one. Eternit announces several material facts to the shareholders and the general market. This one from December 50, after the ruling by the Constitutional Supreme Court announcing that had suspended the mining activities until second order and informing that all their fiber cement plants are using only polypropylene synthetic fibers replacing asbestos. They inform also in this material fact, they will file appeals to reverse the decision. Next. This other material fact from March 19th, they announced in 2018, they announced their request for court supervised reorganization to bankruptcy, mainly accusing us because of the ban of asbestos. Next. This one from January 10th, 2018, they state, 2019, they stated they are suspending sales of the remaining stocks of asbestos fibers in the domestic market, and that they will continue exporting its production to clients in countries where the product is still permitted, such as the United States, India, Indonesia, Malaysia. For United States especially, they are exporting for the chlor-alkali sector. Next slide. This one from January the 10th, 2019, stated that they are suspending sales of the remaining stocks of asbestos fibers in the, I have already told you that they continue to exporting for countries like United States, India, Indonesia, Malaysia. Next one, Eternit announces March 31st that they are going to hibernation of some assets and consequently terminate all its employees unpaid leave for 75 days. They were not receiving any money for 75 days, workers, and they were dismissed. And they mentioned losses of almost $1 million because of our actions against asbestos. Next one. The governor of Goiás state, where the mining company is located, enacts a law allowing asbestos exports. Of course, it's evident the unconstitutionality of the law. ABREA and the Labor Prosecutors Association filed an action at the Supreme Court to declare the unconstitutionality of the law. Unfortunately, the trial scheduled for September 15th this week was postponed dateless sine die because there was not quorum in the sessions to decide our complaint. One justice was not, one of the 10 justices was not there. And for this, we didn't have our trial, expected the trial for a long time. Next one. This slide is missing, but I have here a newspaper that announced this. I don't know if it's possible to be, we can see, but it announced that the illegal exports through our biggest seaport in Brazil, based in our unquestionable law enforced that bans the asbestos in São Paulo state. Labor prosecutors and the labor judges worked together with us from ABREA to halt the traffic of asbestos raw in our roads, and they embarked in the ships, obliging the cargo returned to the producer, based on the principle of polluter payer. This slide is correct now. Eternit announces in August 20th that received a notification of a public civil action filed by the Federal Prosecution Office, whose injunction ordered the immediate suspension of all activities of its subsidiary, the mining company Sama. Next one, bad news. Once more, the injunctions war is present in our work life for a long time. In September 4th, they announced that the Superior Court of Justice, it's not the Constitutional Court, it's another court, suspended the effects from the ruling given to the public civil action until a final decision is given based on the merits of the main lawsuit. Sama informs as well that they returned its operating activities of exportation grounded in the Goiás state law, even stating in their material facts to be under court supervised reorganization. Eternit is incorporating new fiber cement plant in the holding. Previously, this company was an asbestos cement plant, which was converted in asbestos-free. As well, they announced that they paid all their debts and that they are practically recovered of the risk of a bankruptcy, and announced too a new product, a revolutionary product, concrete tiles with photovoltaic cell included it to store sun energy. They say that this is a revolutionary product, very, very innovation in this market of roofing. And that the last one, Brazil is practicing the immoral double standard, an environmental injustice against the human rights. The struggle goes on, and we will not give up. Thank you.
Thank you, Fernanda. I appreciate it very much. And I do see that the struggle goes on. And we know with you there in Brazil that you're going to continue to do great things. And we appreciate everything you do for the citizens of your country. And we appreciate you sharing with us all that you have gone through and continue to work for. Our next speaker is a friend and actually a neighbor of mine in the Washington, D.C. metro area, Barry Castleman. Barry is an environmental consultant trained in chemical and environmental engineering. He holds a Doctor of Science degree from Johns Hopkins School of Public Health. He's been a consultant to numerous agencies of the U.S. government and other governments, international bodies, and environmental groups dealing with a wide range of public health issues. He's testified as an expert in civil litigation in the U.S. on the history of asbestos as a public health problem and the reasons for failure to properly control asbestos hazards. Dr. Castleman has spent the past 40 years 40 years working on asbestos as a public health problem. Barry, we're delighted to have you with us today. Thanks.
Thanks, Brent. I'm going to talk about major cases that have been going forward in Italy, which is the only country in the world to actually hold businessmen criminally responsible for causing occupational disease in workers and in community residents from asbestos. The giant Eternit plant in Casale Monferrato caused several thousand deaths among the workers and community residents. To this day, in a town of 35,000 people, we're seeing about one case a week of mesothelioma arising. It's just terrible. And the Italian Eternit had a giant asbestos plant in the town of Casale, and they owned mines as well, the Swiss Eternit Group. And this was owned and managed by Stefan Schmidt-Heine. And Stefan Schmidt-Heine is a multi-billionaire who is being criminally prosecuted for murder in the deaths of 392 people in a case that has just started. By way of background, Schmidt-Heine was tried for creating an environmental disaster in 2012. The court found that he convicted him, sentenced him to 16 years in jail. The appeal court raised the sentence to 18 years, adding additional deaths in Naples that hadn't been counted in the original case. And then the case was thrown out in 2014 on a technicality, a legal technicality, saying that this particular crime could not be prosecuted because of the statute of limitations. And at the same time, the 2014, earlier in the year, the legendary prosecutor, Raffaele Guariniello, filed murder charges against Schmidt-Heine. Schmidt-Heine is very well represented by lawyers. And by the time this bounced up and down through various courts in Italy, it was determined that there would be 4 trials for Mr. Schmidt-Heine of manslaughter and murder in the 4 regions of Italy where the deaths had occurred. He has been convicted in one of these trials that was held in Turin involving 2 deaths, and was sentenced to 4 years in jail. That was in 2019. That is now on appeal. A murder trial started in Naples and is hopefully going to finish sometime by the end of this year, involving 8 deaths. And this is, as I say, this is concluding. And now the big trial, the Eternit 2 murder case, is now just started in the town of Novara for 392 deaths, including people in Casale who worked in the plant and who lived in the neighborhood of the plant. As in Naples, this is a jury trial. This is the court of assizes. That is to say that it's not just in front of judges, but in front of 2 professional judges and 6 people who are called citizen judges, who are chosen off the voters' rolls, who are over 35 years old. The parties in the case have nothing to do with the selection of the citizen judges. This is done almost in a kind of lottery manner. And so there isn't the kind of questioning of jurors that might go on in a civil case in the United States prior to the selection of the jurors. In any case, the trial has begun. Schmidt-Heine's lawyers are expected to challenge the diagnosis in every single one of the 392 cases, and to do everything they can to prolong the trial as much as possible. Mr. Schmidt-Heine is 74 years old. Where the victim's exposures began before Schmidt-Heine became the chief executive officer of the Eternit enterprise, which his family largely owned in 1976. The Schmidt-Heine lawyers will argue that it was previous exposures that caused them to develop mesothelioma or other cancers from asbestos. Schmidt-Heine's lawyers will also create as much doubt and confusion as they can arguing about causation in the individual cases and in every other way. The documents that have been seized from a public relations firm that the Eterniet company, the Swiss Eterniet company, had hired show that Schmidt-Heine organized conferences with his top managers in 1976 to train them. As soon as he becomes the CEO of the company, he holds two conferences. One of them's in Germany, one's in Switzerland. In Germany, he's training these managers to threaten unions and lie to the media and to the public about the dangers of asbestos because it was becoming a controversial issue. Up until then, the asbestos industry had an easy ride, but now they were being confronted with media interest, union concerns, insurance concerns, and so on. And so he needed to train his managers to respond to these things. And in one of these, Schmidt-Heine says at the end, according to the document, some of you were shocked about the dangers of asbestos. We have to make sure that doesn't happen with the workers. And the Court of Appeals in the first Eterniet case said that by covering up the dangers of asbestos, Schmidt-Heine delayed the ban on asbestos in Italy by 10 years. In any case, the public relations firm followed a plan which they laid out in another memo to protect Schmidt-Heine from financial and personal liability. And they were very pleased with how well that had gone in 1992 when this document was written, 8 years after they started. So the Italian enterprise was still functioning before its bankruptcy in 1986. And 2 years earlier, the public relations firm was already planning to lay off all of the liability and responsibility on the Italian managers and the Swiss Eterniet Group, which was an empty shell. It had been the enterprise that managed asbestos plants and mines all over the world, but they sold off everything they could and transferred all the wealth into another company called ANOVA. And so this memo says, we lay off all the liability on level 1, which is the Italian management, and level 2, the empty shell Swiss Eterniet Group. And we avoid even mentioning level 3, which is ANOVA, the company where all the money went from the sale of the asbestos mines and factories. And level 4 was listed as STS, Stefan Schmidt-Heine himself. These names will not even be mentioned in Italy as far as the public relations people were concerned. And so this plan had been very successful 8 years after it started. The trial has now begun in September, the big Eterniet trial over the 392 deaths. The prosecutor's presentations of evidence began this month with a former worker, Nicola Pondrano, testifying about the giant plant in Casale and describing the pollution of the community, the terrible dusty working conditions in the plant, the suffering of workers dying from asbestosis and mesothelioma, and the denials of the hazard by the corporate management. The crushing of broken asbestos cement sheets and pipe wastes outside the plant near workers' houses ended up in lining driveways, attics, courtyards, sports fields, and even churchyards. It was always the public authorities that financed the reclamation of buildings and dust throughout the area, not the company. The company even lowered its payments to the government worker insurance agency, falsely claiming that there was no more asbestos used there 5 years before they closed down the plant. So this trial, as I say, 6 of the people on the on the court, the judges are going to be ordinary citizens. And so now the challenge remains to put on this case over the next probably year and a half and try to bring some justice to this situation with Stefan Schmidt-Heine. If he's convicted, he would eventually go on the red list of Interpol and not be able to travel without being arrested, even with his multi-billionaire resources. So that's just a summary of where things stand here in Italy, where this remarkable effort is going forward to prosecute toxic corporate crime.
Thank you, Barry. I really appreciate it. There's so much more I'd like to hear about that. And maybe we'll have the opportunity at the close of our session here. Our next scheduled speaker was to be Harminder Bains, and Harminder also sends her regrets. And I want to let you know just a little bit about her from the UK. Harminder is a partner at Lee Day, a law firm in London. Her father actually passed away from mesothelioma, and as a consequence, she has campaigned to successfully use the law to protect the rights of victims of asbestos-related diseases. Very sorry she can't be with us. She's a fantastic presenter, but we know we'll have the opportunity to see her again soon. Next up is Carmen Lima. Carmen is the coordinator of Quercus's Waste Information Center, founder and coordinator of SOS Amianto, the Portuguese asbestos victim support group. Carmen has a degree in environmental engineering, a postgraduate degree in environmental management and sustainable construction, and a master's in planning and sustainable construction. And currently, she's working on her PhD in environmental engineering dedicated to the issue of asbestos. She has participated as a speaker and a moderator in several conferences and auditions, not only in Portugal, but in Cape Verde, Belgium, Brazil, and the United States. She frequently participates in television programs, in interviews and articles for the media. Carmen, we're delighted to have you share your knowledge with us today. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to start with to thank you for this invite to ADAO, and especially to Linda. You heard, I'm from Portugal. I founded the first Portuguese asbestos victim group, the SOS Asbestos, and I worked a long time ago in this issue. I will start to share with you my presentation. So, in Portugal, when we talk about asbestos, everybody thinks about cement, asbestos, covers, and a few materials. But I can say that nobody imagines the diversity of asbestos materials, and they think that the only problem is the asbestos covers, especially in schools. And we can find asbestos in a lot of other materials in those same schools. Today, the priority in Portugal for the workers, the parents, and even for the Portuguese government is the asbestos cement covers. There is any diagnostic previous to the asbestos materials, so they remove those covers and believe that those buildings transform themselves into asbestos-free places. But in Portugal, we have used several examples of materials with asbestos, like deposits for water, flush toilets, flocked asbestos, or even insulation. We have used asbestos even in Armstrong ceiling, vinyl floors and carpets, and even in window blind tape. It's usually to find asbestos in heat equipment, radiators, or even in toasters, or even in materials that are being used in industrial use. In Portugal, the vast majority of the fibers used were chrysotyl and imported from Canada, but there are references for the use of amosite and crucidolite, and even a mixture of those three fibers in the factories that produce the asbestos cement materials here in Portugal. There were three, and they do this mixture to improve the characteristics of the materials that they produce. Since the first knowledge of lung disease caused by the exposure to asbestos until the banning here in Europe in 2005, it was over 100 years of exposure to asbestos. After the prohibition, Portugal needs to implement the European United obligation, like the workers' protection, the diagnosis requirement for private and public buildings, and for the removal regulation and standards. Currently, any company in Portugal can remove asbestos, do not need a license or a professional portfolio or even a certification, and it promotes a non-compliance situations and a lack of accuracy and a lack of protection on the removal of asbestos. In 2015, the European Economic and Social Committee published an opinion that came to present asbestos as a priority issue for Europe. This opinion proposes the elimination of asbestos in Europe until 2032. Is a goal that could be very ambitious for Portugal, who started a few years ago to take the first steps in the identification of materials and equipment with asbestos, and where asbestos removal is accomplished without great control or criteria. The numbers in Portugal are less expressive than the other European countries, such as Spain or even Italy, like Barry showed us, but we believe they are far from the reality. There are many mesotheliomas, there are misdiagnostic, and lung cancers caused by the exposure of asbestos are not quantified. The official numbers are low for the reasons that I mentioned, and 98% of cases are not reported to the employer, so that only 2% of the disease caused by the exposure of asbestos are considered as an occupational disease. On the other hand, there are different parameters for the characterization of the occupational disease in the European Union, which leads to the same disease can be marked in one country and not classified in the other. The survey in public buildings here in Portugal began in 2014, and it was followed by a search for a funding to support the removal of asbestos in these kind of buildings. The money only achieved to Portugal in the last years, and the first step will start with the schools. It is important to start with the schools, but we believe that it is important to remove all kind of asbestos in all kind of materials in schools. There are some problems with this survey. We think it needs to be improved, namely with regards to the identification of all asbestos materials, like I said, that are not identified in the schools. Later, it came the obligation to identify asbestos in working private buildings, and is still missing an important work. We need to regulate the obligation to analyze the private housing buildings that are not yet regulated here in Portugal. There's a lot of work to do. since the investigation, the origin, the incorporation, the production, and the use. We have started to diagnosticate the application in buildings, private and public buildings, and define the removal actions for the most serious cases. But it's still missing the monitoring plan. The management of asbestos, of waste containing asbestos, has been regulated already here in Portugal, and SOS Asbestos has already asked for a national plan of action for asbestos, following the recommendations of the European Economic and Social Committee. Some rash decisions that have been adopted here can have serious consequences. In the last months, the Portuguese government banned the reception of asbestos cement in some landfills, and the result was they started to be abandoned in all over the place, in all over the Portuguese regions. The SOS Asbestos, there I present you, is the first Portuguese victim group support, and we want to contribute to raise awareness over the population about the risk of asbestos exposure, press the government agency to identify and regulate the market of asbestos removal, where we are working now, and I'm finished our first proposal for standards, and I hope that I can have the authorization and send to you to you know that. And we want to alert to the risks of the bed removals and denounce the situations of non-conformity and illegality in asbestos removal. As a research, and with the SOS Asbestos team support, we have been following several case studies here in Portugal, carrying out the evaluation of some situations, such as the old asbestos cement materials factory, like this one that you are seeing in those photos, is Cimianto. It's near to Lisbon, and which, after a no control equipment removal, it became completely contaminated with asbestos fibers. And here we can find include big bags with asbestos dust. Like you see in these photos, this situation is very similar to the case of Eternity in Brazil, and Fernanda can testify that they are very real similar. What it was due in Brazil. Another image very interesting is the fact that these photos are taken for an artist, because the factory was abandoned and everybody can enter, even the artists came in and take photos, and I find these photos in a website in internet. So here you can see the factory is still like the last days of working, and there are no limits to enter in this place. Another case was the Portuguese train workshop. There we visit and see everything they are done, and follow up the asbestos removal works in the carriage. Those carriage are purchased from our Spain neighbors, and they are recovered into new ones, like you see in the photo on the right. Other case that we are monitoring is the emblematic Portuguese Funchal vessel. We are following up the asbestos removal works that are doing right now to eliminate the blue asbestos, like you see in the photo of the center, that was applied on 5 fire stop zones. And it will be recovered to an hotel here in Lisbon. The solution is to eradicate asbestos. And for that, we need to have rigor and care. In principle, in fact, in the works of asbestos removal, these works will increase more and more, and we need to be very focused on the prevention, on the protection, on the removal, and in a asbestos waste management. And in the photo of the right, you can see the finished product of the vitrification process that transforms asbestos in a rock. In a conclusion, here in Portugal, we do not believe there is a danger and a not dangerous asbestos like some people want us to believe. It still has a very strong lobby to promote this kind of opinions, and we need to remove the asbestos materials with a previous diagnosis. There are only cement asbestos here in Portugal. We have a lot of different materials, and it's very easy to see them if you know them. So we need to regulate the removal activity to protect everybody and to prevent more victims. Thank you.
And thank you very much, Carmen. Appreciate you bringing us up to speed on what's happening in Portugal. Our next speaker represents Africa, and I'm proud to introduce you to Ehi Aiden. Ehi, thanks for being with us. Ehi is an occupational health and safety consultant, and he has over 20 years of work experience spanning healthcare, patient safety, and occupational health and safety management. He holds professional certificates in industrial hygiene, community change in public health, mobile phone for public health, society and health, global social entrepreneurship, behavioral medicine, patient safety, health and wellness, population health, and an advanced diploma in occupational health and safety management. And he also holds an MBA and a Master of Science in Workplace Health and Safety, and is currently a doctoral fellow doing a study on workplace health and wellness promotion. He is the founding CEO of Occupational Health and Safety Managers, a West African regional chair, patient safety movement and coordinator of OSH Africa. He's a member of the Board of Trustees in Occupational Safety and Health Africa Foundation and Occupational Health Research and Development Initiative. Wow, in terms of occupational health and safety, you've got the diploma for sure. We're delighted to have you with us. Thanks.
Thank you so much, everyone. Good evening from this part of the world. It is 8:13 p.m. in Nigeria, and I feel so excited being invited to be amongst such wonderful scholars. Linda, I must thank you for the opportunity granted me and to be part of this great thing. Let me start by just quickly highlighting a few things as it concerns occupation asbestos in Africa. I believe asbestos, no matter what guise, what dose, what exposure it is, there is no amount of dosage of asbestos exposure that should be turned legal. No matter how minute it is, no human being under the face of the earth that has cause to work in the workplace should be exposed to asbestos. And it's a big issue. I mean, where we see clearly most countries in the world are creating legislation against asbestos, banning of asbestos. We still see Africa still grappling and trying to even figure out what asbestos really is, what the disease really are. And you see mining sites that have been closed years ago, they are beginning to open up. Constructions are going wide across Africa, and materials that have high dosage of asbestos are being used. And when you look at this and you try to juxtapose it with what happens in other parts of the world, you begin to wonder how come people that live here, they still have life, they still surviving. And this is where we have the problem. A number of countries have risen up, I mean, in terms of leadership responsibility, in terms of asbestos ban and control. But that hasn't been the case in Africa at all. We're still struggling greatly with this and hoping that hope becomes the answer for us someday. Let me just quickly share a few slides I put up. What we're trying to do in Africa is trying to have what you call experts against asbestos use in Africa. And this is one clear thing we're setting up in West Africa, where I lead, to have experts come together to lend their voice against asbestos use in Africa. If we do not, the future is so dark here, and we need support globally and internationally on how to speak in against asbestos across Africa. And a lot of issues abound in Africa. People are asking why those who are the promoters of asbestos asking, yeah, we trade in this. Why are we banning it? Why are we stopping it? But the truth is, no one has a right to make profit at the expense of another man's life. And that is the position that we put forth in Africa. So you can't profit at the expense of on another man's life. And that's why we're coming together as West Africa to see what we can do in speaking against asbestos. But we must salute, in all honesty, two great countries in Africa who we have seen that have been able to come out squarely to speak against asbestos. And that's South Africa and Mozambique, who have been able to come out to clearly put a ban on asbestos use in their countries. From African Union perspective, this is the advocacy we are doing. We want African Union to make it compelling for all the 54 member states in Africa to be able to come up with the same boldness that we've seen exhibited in Mozambique and South Africa in outright ban of asbestos. The truth is, who is driving this in Africa? What is non-owned becomes nobody's property. So asbestos use, if nobody drives, it becomes nobody's property. So we have come together as West Africa, and we are driving these processes gradually. And people are beginning to actually listen to us. We are seeing a number of countries where the advocacy has become so strong, and people are asking, if we don't use asbestos, what are the alternatives? So what we have done is to set up West Africa that has about 270 members from 40 African countries. And we are at the forefront of driving this right now across Africa. And we can't just do this alone. Every day we keep recruiting new members who are getting interested, because asbestos is a very interesting field if you really get it into it and see how we can lend our voice. One of the key things we have done to make this happen was to set up two strategic scientific committees that can drive these processes. One of such is to set up Occupational Safety and Health Research Data and Publication Committee. Why do we need this? We need data to support our claims in the fight against asbestos in Africa. We need to have research. We need to have studies that we can lay claim on, that we can say this is what happened in Africa. So we have a team of experts being led by a professor from Rwanda that is driving this process to ensuring that, yes, we can do research, we can consult data from where it has been published from, to use this data to talk to policymakers, to talk to government, leadership of companies, organizations on the ills inherent in asbestos. What we've also done was to set up what you call OSH Legislation and Policy Review Committee. The truth is that, like the speaker before me just mentioned, there should be no legality of any form that supports asbestos use, exposure in any dose. So what we're doing is we're reviewing, through this committee, we're reviewing the 54 OSH OSH legislations, the legislation of the 54 member states in Africa, looking at what does the occupational health and safety laws or legislation in these countries, what are they promoting? What do they say? Are there deficits we need to review? Are there areas that are issues that were ignored that we need to add to this, to what currently exists? This is what we're doing. As of today, speaking to the scientific committee chair last week, we have reviewed over 51 legislation of 51 countries in Africa. And what we're doing with this, working with African Union on this, is to see how we can come up with what you call the One Africa OSH legislation. How is it going to help us? Asbestos is a big component of this legislation, so that when we finish this work and we present to African Union, upon sign in, it becomes a guiding document that guides the rest of Africa. That's why the partnership between OSH Africa and the ADAO Foundation is very strategic, because we need to get every information that we need in forming new legislations before these documents get to African Union chair, so that when this is signed on, it become a key document that does not also isolate asbestos like most of the policies we are seeing in other countries have done. Then thirdly, we're also looking at, we also have a committee that's called OSH, that promotes OSH education and competency improvement in OSH. The truth is, you cannot involve in what you do not know. So in Africa, occupational health and safety is still growing at a very slow pace. People come into this field out of passion, excitement, or because they just want to advocate. But the truth is, if you are not trained in any profession, you're a quack. So what we're doing is to see how we can use this committee to build foundation, entry-level qualification, those who have been in the field without certification, but they have done this job. What do we do? Do we make them remain as quack in the field? We are making entry-level qualification available to them to see how we can improve their competency, scale up, so that they can become useful in this field. And this is what we have done across in North Africa, across Africa. We have also set up lately, that's sometime within early this year. This is the new thing within OSH Africa. It's called African Labor Inspectors Forum. We have retinue of labor inspectors in Africa. Asbestos are found in the workplaces, but mind you, when a labor inspector is not well grounded in the field of OSH or in the ills inherent in asbestos, they will go to a workplace to do inspection. They will see asbestos exposure. They will ignore it because they do not know that it is hazardous. We realize in Africa, most of the countries that have labor inspectors, what they did was to just employ people they felt needed employment, but without the requisite training. Does this help occupational and safety in Africa? Absolutely no. While we grow occupational safety in Africa among expert practitioners, there is need for labor inspectorate to grow alongside as OSH grows in Africa. So we just set up this lately, and in doing this, we have been able to put together about 230 members within this group from 30 countries. And what we have done, I mean, in partnership with OSH Africa, we are working in partnership with Workplace Health Without Borders to start the first pilot training in occupational health and safety inspectorate for the bulk of people we have in this. And one of such focus we have in doing this is asbestos control. So these are a number of things that we're doing. And within the Africa framework also, while COVID-19 came, people still have to go to work. But I mean, there were people who were naturally, they still have to work. People like the miners. Miners were still working in different countries. I mean, and what do we have to do? We work with African Union, mostly African Union Development Agency, AUDA, to set up guidelines as it concerns COVID-19 regulation and control in Africa. And we work with African Union Development Agency, the African Union, the ILO, in creating guidelines, sectoral guidelines, and one of such also cover asbestos that people can use while COVID-19 became a thing that we have to deal with in the workplace. We also work along with other agencies in Nigeria to set up school return programs. I mean, where COVID-19 was so crucial, schools were shut down, but children were to come back to schools. Are we going to leave them to come back the way they were before? We also work in creating some guidelines that could also help along this line. But these are many things we have done in Africa. But one fundamental thing that we're doing in going forward is in creating advocacy and engagement as it concerns asbestos in Africa. We have realized that policymakers are the ones that have been left out in this circle. And the new alliance or strategic partnership we set up with ADAO is focused more on strategic engagement of policy makers across Africa. So that partnership we're working with ADAO on is talking to Congress, legislators, those who can make laws for countries to consider asbestos while they sit every day to make the policies. What we want in Africa, or the Africa that we want, is Africa where a child can hug her father while going to school and lives with that hope that as the father returns to work in the evening, there's an opportunity for that spread of hand, for that hug to still continue. Most families have lost breadwinners. Children have become fatherless. A lot of women have become widows because asbestos has not been given the right voice needed in Africa and have taken many lives that ought to have been living today. The pain is endless. The chain of pain is long. But what are we going to do? Are we going to sit down and allow this chain of pain to continue? We must rise up to do something, and that's what we're doing in Osh Africa. And that's why the strategic partnership with ADAO has become so crucial to us in going forward. So Linda, again, I thank you so much for the opportunity you've given unto me to shed light on what is happening across Africa as far as asbestos is concerned. And before I leave, most of us also have lost loved ones in the pandemic that we are in. And we have healthcare workers who are busy working tirelessly day and night to protect our loved ones. And we just salute your courage. For those who have lost loved ones, we burn this candle to you. Our condolences and our heart go to you. This is the world we find ourselves in, but we'll just hold on for a little while. This shall surely come to pass. We'll be able to get our word back the way we meant it. Thank you so much for listening, and God bless you.
Thank you very much for your words. I look forward to the opportunity at the conclusion of our session to ask you a few questions about your work in Africa as well. But thank you so much for your presentation. Sincerely appreciate it. Our last speaker of this series comes from just a bit further around the globe. Ehi, I didn't ask you what time it was. I presume it's late in the evening there in West Africa. And Barry Robson comes to us from Australia, and I believe it's almost 4:30 in the morning there, Barry. Is that correct?
5:30 in the morning now, Brent.
There you go. So thank you for joining us. Barry is the president of the Asbestos Disease Foundation of Australia. He became a union delegate of the Waterside Workers Federation in 1970 and was elected as senior vice president of that union in 1988. In 1995, he was elected assistant branch secretary of the Maritime Union of Australia, a position he held until he retired from the workforce in 2003. He became a delegate to ADFA, that's the Asbestos Disease Foundation of Australia, in 96, and was appointed president in 2002 and then elected president in 2003, and he continues to hold that position today. He's been appointed to the following: the Asbestos Research Institute in 2004, the Federal Government Asbestos and Telstra Infrastructure in 2013, the Federal Asbestos Safety and Eradication Agency, or ASEA, in 2013. Barry's been awarded 3 lifetime memberships: Maritime Union of Australia, St. Mary's Baseball Club, and the Blacktown Mount Druitt Cardiac Support Group. Barry, thank you for being up so bright and early in the morning. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you, ADAO, once again. And to you, Linda, thank you once again for this invitation. Well, just a quick recap on what's been happening here in Australia. COVID's really hit like it has around the world. We can't travel overseas. So all that work that the trade union movement here in Australia have been doing in Asia to implement a ban on asbestos in them countries has sort of slowed down. But prior to the pandemic hitting, FEDA, that's the organisation, the trade union organisation that does all that work, came very close to getting Vietnam to implement a ban. But as I said, the pandemic, and the impetus has been lost. But I'm sure that once the pandemic's over and we'll be able to travel again, we'll get that back on track. Because if we can get Vietnam to put a ban on, then Cambodia, then Laos, and so on, will also implement bans. And the reason why we're pushing it really, really hard to try and get a ban in Asia is because even though we've got a total ban of asbestos imports into Australia since 2003, we are still having asbestos imported into this country mainly from being manufactured in these Asian countries. Just say, for instance, in the last 12 months, we've had 5 brand new ferries that were supposed to go to work on Sydney Harbour. Can't do it, full of asbestos. And there's lots of other problems with them also, but one of the main things is they were brought into the country, into Australia, and when they went to, the workers went on board to commission these ferries, they found all the asbestos. The one that's popped up in the last couple of months, believe it or not, is these remote controlled cars, radio controlled cars. There's little asbestos gaskets in these cars. So if they haven't hit around the world, they've hit Australia. So I dare say they'd be on the market right around the world. The other thing I'd like to touch on is the Rotterdam Convention. Australia, because of the way it's set up, the convention, Australia gets the one to move that there be asbestos be listed as a hazardous product. Problem is the voting system in the convention. You only have to have one country vote against any motion, and it's dead. Then you've got to wait another 2 years to go back again. So, listening to the E from Africa, it gives me great heart to think that there are people willing to go and front governments to change the laws. Well, if E can convince the African governments to back the change, to change the vote at the Rotterdam Convention. So it's a majority vote to get motions through, not to have one vote to stop any motion. When I was there in 2015, it just broke my heart to stand in that, to stand alongside of some asbestos victims from India, and to hear the delegate from that country say to that august body that there were no asbestos victims in India. I couldn't believe it. And yet, in the same hall where this convention was taking place, we had these two victims from India. So, I'm going to keep banging on about it, but people from around the world, all the ban asbestos people should put pressure on their governments to support the change to the voting laws at the Rotterdam Convention. And just taking up on Barry Castlemaine's presentation, Hardy's, mate, the James Hardy here in Australia, we took them on 10 long years. And all the things that you said that's happening in Italy, that we went through the same thing, and trying to convince government to prosecute these companies, it's a really hard slog. But I've been keeping an eye on the Italian situation, and it was a great report, Barry. It gives me a bit of heart to see that it's finally getting hopefully into the court system and get a resolution. What else can I talk about? What would like to say, I'll finish up by what I would propose is that this conference put together a communique from the conference, supported by all the presenters and all the attendees, to urge the United States Congress to move the Alan Reinstein Act. Get it into Congress. And that should be a thing coming out of this conference, a communique supported by everybody at this conference. And because if we take the United States out of the equation of using asbestos, then it helps knock over all the other countries. You know, to have the United States, one of the big manufacturing countries in the world, to ban asbestos, wow, wouldn't that be a kick in the pants for the asbestos industry? So I have not discussed that proposal with anybody, Linda, but I would urge that the conference give some consideration to that. And thank you once again for the Alan Reinstein Award. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. I very much appreciate your words, and I think that all of us would agree that a great outcome of this conference would be to get some very broad support for the Alan Reinstein Ban Asbestos Now Act, which many people have been working very hard on for a lot of years.
Yes.
I do want to say this as we're all gathered here. I guess I don't really find it unusual that we all face kind of the same challenges, no matter what country we're in. It's very interesting to hear that. You look at Brazil and you find that, they've been successful in banning asbestos, but the battle goes on. We talk about the need to actually enact regulations in countries like Portugal to protect the workers who are doing the asbestos abatement, and to have some laws and some strategies around that. Barry, I find it super interesting that in Italy, they are criminally prosecuting somebody. That I hope that will serve as a message to many other countries around the world. And it goes on and on. And it's a great organization like the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization that's able to pull all these great minds together from many different countries and to share ideas. And Linda, kudos to you, kudos to your colleagues and your volunteers for all the work you do.
Thank you. Don't sign off yet. So Barry, you're spot on. You're going to put you to work. Ehi and I were already talking about an ILO, WHO declaration. But I'll be honest, if you saw my kitchen table, that's where this is hanging today. We ran out of time. Fernanda's laughing. She knows what I'm talking about. So you're right. We need to lock arms. In the meantime, I will tell you, during this conference, I got an email from a scientist arguing with me about the definition of asbestos fiber. With all this going on, he wants to argue about what's a fiber. So that being said, we hang tough, we hang tight, we'll get it done. So yes on everything. Brent, you did a beautiful job. Can you moderate forever and ever? Because you've got it.
Sure, Linda, sign me up.
And I have great respect for Fernanda and Carmen, because my Portuguese is nowhere close to your English. So thank you for being brave enough to speak. So Brent, you sign off. I'm going to, at the end of Brent's farewell, I'm going to pop back on alone, throw in a little Jess. And by the way, there is a petition to sign. Barry, we got Barry Castleman, Dr. Castleman. AFL-CIO launched a letter writing campaign today where with a click of a button, you can actually execute a letter to members of Congress. They did that, the unions, Barry Robson, the powerhouse that they are. So I'm going to stop talking, get ready for my next closing bit. Awards are at 4:30. Brent, you want to sign off?
I certainly do. I just want to send a big thank you to all my colleagues from around the world for not only for joining us today, but for your continuing work in all that you do, because together, we're actually beginning to see some change. There's some positive movement. It's frustrating some days, but thank you for all you do. And I hope we can continue to support each other in our objective to rid the world of asbestos-related disease. Thanks.
Thank you.
So much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.